Let's now discuss a few render settings. I'm going to go into the sequencer and I'm going to click on this icon. Make sure that it is set to movie render queue. I'm going to click on this icon and it will show up this movie render queue window. On the left hand side, we have the name of the level sequence that we're going to render. On the right hand side, we have the output directory wherever we want to save our rendering results in the form of frames or PNGs or whatever you want to call that. And in the middle, we have the render settings. I'm going to click here and it's going to show us this new window for render settings. First up in here, we have JPEG sequence. This is actually the file format in which Unreal will render your animation. Right now, it is set to a JPEG sequence and it is enabled, but we're not going to render our animations with JPEG. We're actually going to use EXR sequence. The reason why we're going to go ahead with EXR sequence is because EXR is a very high dynamic range industry standard file format, and it can store a lot more information for color and exposure than other file formats. You can see that it is 16-bit, whereas JPEG is 8-bit, and the other file formats in here are also just not as good as EXR. You can see that PNG is 8-bit, and we also have Apple ProRes, but it is also just not as good as EXR. Okay, so we're going to render our animations with EXR sequence. We can either disable JPEG or just delete it. Next up in here, we have a deferred rendering under this rendering tab. And in here, we're going to define whether we want to render our scene or our animation with lumen or with path tracing. If we want to render our animation with path tracing, we're going to go in here and click on path tracer and add this path tracer option in here and disable deferred rendering. But if we want to render our animation with lumen, then we're going to have to disable path tracing and enable deferred rendering in here. Okay, we're going to discuss path tracing in a completely separate video, so I'm just going to delete it for now. Next up in here, we have some output settings. In here, we can make some further adjustments or some final changes like frame rate, resolution, and playback range. First up in here, we have output directory. This is where we can define the file path or the folder where we want to save our animation. I can click on this triple dot icon and select the folder wherever I want to save my frames or animation, and then click on select folder. Next up in here, we have file format. This is actually the naming convention of the frames. For example, whenever it will generate or render a frame inside this folder, it will use this naming convention. First, it will write down the sequence name and then the frame number. For example, in here, you can see that I've rendered a few frames by using the default naming convention. And on the right hand side, you can see that we have the frame number 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. And in the middle, we have the name of the level sequence, which is short 1 in this case. And LS stands for level sequence in here. Okay, so this is the default naming convention or file format name. If you want to change that, you can do that in here, but I generally like to keep it at default. Next up in here, we have the output resolution. In here, we can type the resolution in which we want to render our frames or animation. For example, let's say that if we want to render our animation in 4K, I can type in here 3840 by 2160. But right now, I'm just going to keep it at default and render it at 1080p resolution. Next up in here, we have custom frame rate. In here, you can adjust the frame rate of your animation. But as far as films and cinematics are concerned, 24 FPS is the general rule of thumb. Next up in here, we have custom playback range. In here, we're going to define the duration of our animation. For example, our animation begins at 0. So I'll type 0 in here. And I believe it is ending at frame number 54. It is. So I'll type 54 in here. And that is pretty much it. So these were a few very basic settings. In the next video, we'll learn about some advanced settings. So I'll see you guys in the next one.